Welcome back to the Simulator series. In today's episode, we are going to be scripting the pet hatching animation. As always, if you guys do enjoy the video or it does help you out, make sure you smash the like button, also hit the subscribe button, and turn post notifications on if you want to get notified whenever I upload more Roblox development content. I also have a Patreon if you guys like to support me and gain access to all the scripts and the game file that I make during this episode. There's a link down below in the description, and you guys go and check that out. With that being said, let's hop right into it. Hopping directly in the studio, the first thing we're actually going to do is add all of our missing pets to our pets config module. So inside of the replicated storage, we have a pets folder. This is where we store all of our pets models, and then we also have a module script named pets inside of the configs folder as well. Inside of the script, we have a variable called config, and we only added 2 pets to this. You might see me do this a little bit often throughout the series. The reason I do that is because when you're developing a brand new system, you don't want to add all of the pets into this config and set all their values and everything until you actually know that that's exactly how you want your config table to be set up. If you've never made this system before, you might not know all the different pitfalls that you could fall into while creating it, and you're never sure of what changes you're going to make until you have the system finished. So that's why I only added 2 here. Realistically, since I'm making this video and I know it's all going to work, I could have added all of them to the config. So now let's go ahead and actually add them to the config. What I'm going to do is I'm simply just going to copy the bunny, and then I'm just going to paste this a bunch of times. Once we're done that, we're going to look inside of the pets folder, and then we're just going to add the rest of the pets. So after the cat, we have the dog pet, then the fox, then the pig, and then finally the turtle. And then we're going to delete our 2 extras, and there we go. We have all of the pets added inside of this config. So any of those errors that we might have been experiencing because the pet was not a part of the config, we no longer will be having them. Next, what we're going to do is look back inside of our game, and then we're actually going to go inside of the starter GUI, and then inside of the pet egg screen GUI, we're going to add a brand new frame. We're going to rename this frame to animation. For the size, on the X scale, we can set this to about 0.75 and 0.6 on the Y. We then are going to want to center this just like that. Next, what we're going to do is throw a UI grid layout inside of here, and then we're also going to throw a viewport frame inside of there. We're going to rename this viewport frame to template, and now we can start playing around with the UI grid layout. How our cell size is going to be set up is entirely based on how many total pets can be hatched at a single time. So for example, certain games you can only hatch 1 pet at a time. Other games you can hatch 3 pets at a time, and in Clicker Simulator you're able to hatch up to 6 pets at a single time. So what our setup for 6 pets would actually look like: for the cell size on the X scale, we're going to set that to 0.3, and on the Y we would set that to maybe something like 0.45. What we can then do is duplicate this a couple of times, and now we can see that this is how it's going to look with 6 eggs. Now it might be a little bit hard to imagine that this looking good, but trust me, we'll eventually get to that point. But anyway, like I was saying, if you're only going to have 3 eggs in your game, you could set the Y to 1, and then you just would only have 3 templates inside of here at all times. So that's how you could do it for 3 eggs, and this is how you could do it for 6 eggs. Now, if in your game you can only hatch 1 pet at a time, then you don't even need to use a UI grid layout. You could just set the size of this viewport frame to the max scaled, and you're pretty much good to go. Anyways, we then want to make some changes to the UI grid layout as well. So for the horizontal alignment, we're going to set that to center as well as the vertical alignment. Now, once again, we can delete like 3 of these, see how this looks with 3, and then we could also see how this looks with 1, and I think that looks pretty good. Now, inside of this template, we're going to add a brand new text label. We're going to rename this text label to pet. For the text, we're just going to say something like dog. For the text color, we're going to set that to a white. For the background transparency, set that to 1. For the size, we're going to go 1 on the X scaled and maybe 0.12 on the Y. For the font, we're going to go with the Gotham. Maybe we can even make that bold. We're also going to set the text to scaled, and then we want to throw a UI stroke inside of here. Now the stroke is going to be black, and you could set this to anything like even 3. Now that text label is pretty much all good to go. What we're then going to do is create another text label. We're going to rename this to delete. The text is going to be an X. The text color is going to be a red. The background transparency, of course, set that to 1. For the size, we can make this a 1:1 scaled. We're going to set the font to Gotham, bold. Actually, we're going to go black, so that's even larger. And then we're going to set that to scaled. Now, the reason we're doing this is because pets can be automatically deleted when they hatch. So this is what we're going to do to indicate that the specific pet has been deleted. This still visualizes to the player what pet they actually would have received, and then we also let them know that it has been deleted. Now, of course, you don't need to use a text label. If you have an image, which is just an X, you could, of course, also use an image label. The scripting is all going to be the same. Now, once we're done with that text label, what we can then do is set the background transparency of the template to 1, and then we could also set the background transparency of the animation to 1 as well. Additionally, for the pet and delete text labels, we're actually going to want to set them to not be visible, as well as the template itself. For the animation frame, we're going to set that to be visible, and the pet egg screen GUI should be set to enabled as well. Now, before we start scripting, we actually need to grab the egg model and put that inside of a replicated storage. How we're going to do this is we have the egg stand right down here, so we're going to go inside of the workspace, and then we're going to select one of the egg stand models. Inside of the egg stand model, we have a mesh part called glass, and inside of here, we have a mesh part called egg. What we're going to do is duplicate that, drag that inside of the workspace, so outside of the model. Then we're going to right click on this, select group as model. We're going to rename this to egg. For the primary part of this model, we want to set that to the egg mesh part. And now that we have that, we're going to put that inside of a replicated storage. Now we can actually start scripting the GUI. So what we're going to do is we're going to go inside of Star Player, inside of Star Player scripts, open up that GUI folder. Inside of the GUI folder, we're going to want to open up that eggs module script. And of course, inside of here, we need to create a couple of variables. So we're going to want to create a variable for the tween service. Additionally, we just added a brand new frame inside of here. So let's create a variable called animation, and that's going to be equal to GUI.animation. Now this variable name could possibly be confusing, and if it is to you, then you certainly can name this animation frame or something similar to that. It honestly is probably not a great idea to name this animation, because if other developers come and work on this, they probably would think that this is a literal animation. I don't know. Tell me what you guys think down below. Is it a bad variable name? I think it could definitely be better, but I also don't want to type out frame because none of our other variables have a suffix of frame then, so I'd also really want to change them, but I also hate typing out frame with that as well. Tell me what you guys think. But anyway, we're going to set that as animation, and then right above the update pet function, we're actually going to create a brand new function, which is called hatch animation. Now this function is going to accept an egg and a pet, which are both strings. Inside of here, we want to create a variable for the pet model. That's of course going to be inside of the replicated storage, inside of the pets folder. We want to use find first child on this, and we want to look for that pet, and then we want to make sure that we clone it once we find it. After that, we're going to create a variable for the egg model, which is going to be replicated storage dot egg, and then we're going to clone that. And then we also want to create a variable for the template, which is going to be equal to animation.template, and we want to clone that as well. Now, once we clone that, we want to get the pet text label, and we're going to set the text of that equal to the pet's name. We can then parent that to the animation frame, and then we also want to set the visibility to true as well, so we can actually see it. Now, in certain simulators I've played, I've actually seen people add something to their game where the player can actually skip the animation. Now, we're not going to add that logic in now because that'll probably be for a settings video, but we're going to add a note right here that says add skip animation so that I remember in the future to come back to this part and fill this in when we actually add the settings and then start scripting things related to that. After that, we're going to use the viewport model module, and we're going to generate the viewport frame. We're going to pass through the template as well as the egg model. What that'll do is it will display the egg model that we have inside of the viewport frame. And now that we're displaying that egg, we actually need to animate it and basically rotate it from one direction to the other to make it look like a little wobble effect. After we begin displaying the egg in the viewport frame, we then want to set the orientation of the egg model's primary part. Now, what we're actually going to set that to is vector3.new 0, 0, -70. Now, why we're setting the egg's orientation is because we're basically tilting it in one specific direction, and then when we do our animation, we're going to rock it back to the other direction, and then it's going to reverse and continue doing that. So for instance, if we go into our replicated storage, we grab this egg model, and then we move it up a little bit so that we can actually see it. Let's go ahead and modify the orientation. If we then set the orientation to 0, 0, -70, we can see that this is tilted to the left side. Then what we're going to do is with the tween service, we're actually going to modify the orientation, and we're going to smoothly go from -70 to +70. So now it's tilted the exact opposite way. And then what we're going to do is repeat this again, so go back to -70, and that's what our effect is going to be like. So it's going to be shaking towards both directions. Now I'm going to undo all this so our model goes back inside of the replicated storage, and then we're going to hop back into our script. So now that we set the orientation of this, we're going to go ahead and create a variable called tweeninfo. That's going to be equal to tweeninfo.new. For the time this is going to take, we're going to say 0.5, so that's going to be half a second. For the easing style, we're going to say enum.easingstyle.cubic. For the easing direction, we're going to say enum.easingdirection.in-out. Now for the repeat count, we want this to repeat one time, and then for reverse, we actually do want this to reverse, so we're going to say true. Then we're going to create a variable called tween. That's going to be equal to tween service :create. The instance that we want to use the tween service on is going to be egg model dot primary part. Then we want to pass through the tween info, and now we need to create a table with the property that we actually want to modify. The property that we want to modify is the orientation, and we want to set that equal to a brand new vector3, 0, 0, +70 this time. So we started off at -70 so that it rocks to the complete opposite way and goes all the way up to +70, and that's how the tween's going to work. And since we set the reverse to true, it's going to rock back to -70, and since it repeats one time, it'll rock back to +70. After we create that tween, we can go ahead and say tween and play that. Then on the tween, we can listen to the completed event, and we're going to create an anonymous function inside of here. Now, once this tween is completed, so once the egg animation is done rocking back and forth, we actually want to display what the pet actually is to the player. So we're going to use the viewport model module. We're going to use the clean viewport function to remove the egg model from it, and we want to pass through the template. After we clean it, we're going to set template.pet, so the pet text label, and we're going to set that to visible, and then we're going to generate the new viewport frame. So we're going to pass through template once again, and then we're going to pass through the egg model, and of course for the orientation, we're going to use angles, 0, math.rad, -90, and then 0 for the Z. We also want to make the delete text label visible as well. And what that's going to be based off of is the state manager using the get data function. We're going to go into the auto delete pets table and we're going to index that with the specific pet. I made a slight mistake here. We're not supposed to index this with the pet. We're supposed to index that with the egg. So we're going to go ahead and fix that. Now for the next minute or two, you might still see the previous mistake where this was only being indexed with pet instead of egg, but that's because I made this fix slightly later in the video. So just keep it exactly how you see it on screen right now. So if that pet should be automatically deleted, then this will become visible. If it should not be automatically deleted, then this will not be visible. After that, we're going to say task.wait. We're going to wait 1 second, and then we're going to destroy our template viewport frame. So we've now created most of this function. What we're then going to do is actually call it. So we want to go inside of the hatch function, and right here at this if statement where we check if the pets variable exists, what we're then going to do is loop through all the pets inside of that pets variable. And each time we loop through it, we want to call the hatch animation. Now, when we call that function, we want to pass through the selected egg and the pet as well. Now, we can actually go into our game and test this out. So now that we're in our game, we can go up to our egg and we can go ahead and hatch a pet. Now we can see that the egg is rotating left and right, and we can actually see that the pet has been shown to us at the end along with the pet's name's text label. Now I'm going to set all the pets to be automatically deleted, hatch a pet, and make sure that that's working. And we can see that the deleted label is working correctly. So let's go ahead and set them to not be deleted, hatch it once again, and we can see that that's working perfectly. Now this animation's cool and everything, but it's not fully finished. There is a little bit more that we can do to actually make it a lot cooler. What I'd like to do is actually hide all of the GUIs that are displayed on screen, including this GUI right here for the hatching. And once the animation is completed, we'll reopen all the GUIs for the player. Additionally, I want to add a little blur effect to the screen as well, because I think that's exactly what they do in Clicker Simulator as well. So let's go ahead and actually add the blur effect. Where we want to do this is inside of the lighting service. We want to add a brand new blur effect instance. Now, once we add that, we can actually see our entire screen is blurred, and tell me that does not look pretty cool. I mean, I like how that looks. But what you're going to want to do is select the blur instance, and you're just going to want to set this to not be enabled. Another thing before you disable it is you can actually set the size of it. Personally, I'm fine with the 24. I don't mind it at all. If you want it to be a little bit less blur, you can set this however you want to, because all we're going to do is set this to enabled when we actually do the animation. So you can configure whatever size you want to right here. Once you have the size set up, make sure you set the enabled to not be true, and then we can go back inside of our script. Now, inside of here, we want to go to the top and add the lighting service. Now that we have the lighting service, we want to go back down to our hatch animation, and right above this, we actually want to create a brand new function called hide GUI. Inside of this function, we're going to go inside of the lighting service. We want to grab that blur effect, and we want to set that to be enabled. After that, we're going to create a variable called enabled GUIs, and that's going to be equal to a table. Then we want to loop through all the GUIs inside of the player's GUI. So we're going to say player GUI get children do. Now, if the GUI is not actually a screen GUI, then we want to just continue end. So we don't want to do anything with that instance if it's not actually a screen GUI. Now, another thing that we want to do towards the top of our script is we want to create a variable called Gui Blacklist, and that's going to be equal to a table. Now I'm going to actually move this variable up with our other constants. Now inside of this table, we're going to add strings for all the GUI names inside of the starter GUI that we do not want to update the enabled property of. Now currently in our game, the only GUI that we actually need to keep enabled is the pet egg GUI. So for the string inside of here, we're actually going to say pet egg. Now you might be thinking, if we're only adding one GUI to this, do we really need to make a list? Well, the reason for this is, like I said, you can add all the names inside of here that you don't want to hide. So for example, if you don't want to hide the left GUI, then you just add the name to here and we won't hide that GUI. Now that we have that variable created, let's go back down to our if statement right here. Now we're checking if it is a screen GUI. And the other thing that we want to check is if this GUI's name is inside of the GUI blacklist variable. So we're going to say table.find. We're going to look through the GUI blacklist table and we're going to look for the GUI's name. Now I forgot to put and right there, but now we're all good to go. After that, we're going to check if the GUI is enabled. And if it is enabled, then we want to insert this inside of the enabled GUI's table. So we're going to insert it just like that. And then we want to set the GUI to no longer be enabled. So after we loop through all the GUIs and disable all the ones which should not be enabled, we're going to go ahead and wait 3 seconds because that's how long our animation actually lasts. And then we're going to loop through all the GUIs inside of the enabled GUIs table. Now, as we loop through all the GUIs, we want to re-enable them. And then after that for loop, we also want to go inside of the lighting, inside of the blur instance, and we want to set that to no longer be enabled. So then what we're going to do is towards the top of our hatch animation function, we're actually going to go ahead and call the hide GUI function. Now we're pretty much done, but we actually have one edge case that we have to account for. Basically, we want to set the pet egg billboard GUI to no longer be enabled when we're doing this animation. Now how we're going to do that is go towards the top of our script. Right below the selected egg variable, we're going to create a new variable called is hatching. That's going to be equal to false. Now inside of the hatch animation function, we want to set is hatching to true. Then once the tween is completed, after we destroy the template, we're going to set is hatching to false. Now where we're actually going to use this variable is towards the bottom of our script inside of our stepped listener. Right here where we check if the closest egg exists, we then want to say and not is hatching. So as long as the player is not hatching, then we can go ahead and display an egg. One quick mistake that I made inside of the hide GUI function for this if statement right here, we shouldn't say and, we should say or. So if it's not a screen GUI or we're able to find it inside of the GUI blacklist, then we want to just skip over that GUI. One more slight thing that we forgot. Once this is completed, we want to set the egg GUIs enabled back to true, because remember, we're hiding this when we start the actual animation, and then we want to unhide the billboard GUI once the animation is actually completed. Once you've done that, you can then go ahead, hop into our game. We're then going to go ahead, hatch a pet. We can see that the blur effect, all the GUIs are hidden, and then eventually we can see that our egg actually hatches and the pet is revealed to us, just like that. In addition to the animation system, I was also reminded that I did not actually create the system for sending a chat message whenever a player hatches a really rare pet. If you're unfamiliar with this, basically in a lot of simulators, whenever you hatch a pet that has something like less than maybe a 1% chance of actually hatching, there will be a text message sent in the chat which all the players can see, and it'll say something similar to MonzterDEV hatched this specific pet with a chance of 0.5% or something similar to that. And that's now what we're going to add. So what we're going to do is go inside of the replicated storage, inside of the remotes folder, inside of the eggs folder, and we're going to add a brand new remote event to this. Now we're going to rename this remote event to hatched chat. The reason that we're adding this remote event is because there's actually no way on the server side to send a message to the chat. So because of that, we have to do all the work of replicating it, which isn't too much work, but it is still just annoying. It should be super simple and it should literally just be like one method call. But of course it's Roblox, so we got to do what we got to do. Now that we have the remote event, we're going to go inside of the server script service and open up the egg script. Inside of here, we want to actually go to the hatch function, and we want to go to where we actually insert that into our pets table. Then right below that, we're going to use the hatch chat remote event that we just created. We're going to fire all clients, and the arguments that we want to provide this remote event is going to be the player's display name as well as the pet, and we also want to provide the chance that the player had to actually hatch this pet. So let's create a variable called hatch chance. That's going to be equal to eggsconfig.get hatch chance. We're going to pass through the egg, we're going to pass through the pet, and then we're going to pass through the profile.data. Now that we have the hatch chance, we only want to send the message to all the clients based off what the chance actually is. So for example, if the chance of hatching a pet is 50%, that's not really exciting. So we don't want to send a chat message every single time a player just hatches an ordinary pet. You of course can come up with your own hatch chance. I'm going to say if hatch chance is less than or equal to 100, and then we're going to fire this remote inside of here. Now the reason that I'm saying 100 is because we want to test this out just to make sure that it works. For example, if you want to only send a chat message when a player hatches a pet that only has a 1% or less chance, then you would just say hatch chance is less than or equal to 1 and then send the message that way. Like I said, I'm going to leave this at 100 because we're just debugging the system. So let's go ahead and pass through the hatch chance as the final argument when we're firing that remote event. And now that we're firing that remote event, the next thing we have to do is go inside of the start player, inside of the start player scripts, inside of the GUI, and we can open up the eggs local script. Now inside of here, we're just going to go down to the very bottom of the script, and at the very bottom, we're going to say remotes.hatchChat.onClientEvent connect, and we're going to create an anonymous function. Now, of course, the arguments are going to be the player's display name as a string, the pet as a string, and the hatch chance as a number. Now, another thing that we actually need to do is towards the top of our script, we need to create a variable for the starter GUI. So we're going to go ahead, create that variable, and then go all the way back down to our remote event down here. Inside of here, we want to create a variable called color. Now, this is just one way of actually customizing your message. For instance, if a player hatches a pet with maybe a 1% chance, you might want that to appear in the chat as a green color. If they hatch something as rare as like a 0.1% chance, then you might want that to appear as red. So that's why we're creating this color variable. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to say if hatch chance is greater than 1, then we're going to use color3 from RGB, and then I'm just going to create a color. So if the hatch chance is greater than 1, I don't know, we'll just do something like a blue. Otherwise, we'll once again color3 from RGB, and then otherwise we'll use something like a red. So if it's 1% or less, the color is going to be red. If it's greater than 1, then the color is going to be a blue. Now that we've done that, using the starter GUI, we can use the set core method, and for the parameter name, we're going to say chat make system message. Now make sure you spell that all correctly, otherwise you probably are going to have an error. And now for the second argument, we actually want to pass through a table. Now we can also create a variable for this as well. So we're going to say local text equals, and now for our actual string, what we want to say is the player's display name. So for example, MonzterDEV hatched a, and then we want to say the pet's name with a, and then we want to use the hatch chance, % chance, exclamation mark. So this text would say something like MonzterDEV hatched a dog with a 5% chance. Now that we've done that, inside the table of the second argument, what we're going to do is we're going to say text, and we're going to set that equal to our text variable. Now additionally, we have another argument that we want to pass through here, and that's actually going to be the color, and we're going to set that equal to the color variable. Now that we've done that, we can go into our game and test this out. So let's go ahead and hatch a pet, and now we can see the chat message has been sent. MonzterDEV hatched a bunny with a 5% chance. And when I hatch again, we can see MonzterDEV hatched a cat with a 40% chance. So we can see that the function functionality is there. It's all working great. Now that you know how the system works, you can easily expand on it to modify the message, change the colors, and then also on the server side of things, you can alter the hatch chance for when you want to actually send this message. Anyways, ladies and gentlemen, with that being said, that's going to be it for this episode. If you guys did enjoy the video, as always, make sure you smash the like button, also hit the subscribe button, and turn post notifications on if you want to get notified every time I upload a brand new video. Additionally, I have a Patreon. If you'd like to support me and get access to all the scripts and the game file that I made during this episode, there's a link down below the description, and you guys go and check that out. With that being said, I'll see you guys in the next episode.